Rupy, what a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much for making time to be on the podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. It's always my pleasure to chat to you. I'm looking forward to it.
It's been a while, so I feel our audience get the gift of hearing us catch up on air. So before we kind of jump into your current business landscape, what you're doing, what you're working on, what you're building, it'd be so valuable for our audience to hear where it all started. So can we go right back to, your area of expertise, when you qualified, what your goals were and vision were at the time in those early days of qualifying?
Yeah. So my aspiration, my vision was never to do what I'm doing today. I just want to say at the get-go, like my sort of journey has been really like windy, and there hasn't been sort of like a clear sort of methodology to where I am today. Back in 2009, I started as a junior doctor. I was working at Basildon Hospital, was working in respiratory medicine, super busy. Was working long shifts. I, found out what it's like to work night shifts and, be coherent in the mornings. And that's when I had my first episode of atrial fibrillation. So a cardiac condition where your heart beats irregularly, in my case, very fast. And so that was the beginning of my patient journey. So I became a patient as well as being a doctor. And I was meant to have something called an ablation. So it's a cardiac procedure where you burn an area around the pulmonary vein to get rid of these misfiring cells or to ring fence them. And it was my mum who suggested that I should really look at diet and lifestyle before I intervene with a more serious and aggressive procedure. And, as a conventionally trained doctor, we're not really taught about lifestyle or nutrition. We're not taught about the evidence base behind that. And so when that was suggested to me by my mum, who's not a medic, I just thought it was complete woo-woo and I had no idea what she was talking about. And I really pushed back quite a lot. But to appease her, I thought, okay, fine, I'll change up things that I'm doing in my diet and lifestyle and just see what happens. But I had every single intention of having this procedure. And so after changing my cereals and changing up my lunches that I was eating at the hospital, and if anyone's eating in a hospital canteen, it's just like sloppy food, lasagnas, chips, pies, all that kind of stuff, not, not particularly appetizing and definitely not healthy. I started noticing differences in the number of times I was having attacks and episodes of atrial fibrillation. And then I started doing meditation, yoga, changing up my workout regime, improving sleep, doing a deep dive into nutrition. And long story short, my AF episodes reverted after about a year and a half. And so that led me down the path of, okay, how on earth is this possible? And why wasn't I taught this kind of stuff at med school? And that was the foundation, I think, of me having more conversations with people inside and outside medicine about nutrition, with my patients as well, having more open, honest conversations about how they can improve their diet to potentially improve things like type 2 diabetes or arthritis, or reduce the risk of a lot of the conditions that we know cost the NHS a huge amount of money every year. And honestly, Lauren, it wasn't until I was qualified as a GP, I'd been working in the job for a number of years, that I actually garnered the confidence to get in front of a camera and start talking about nutritional medicine, start doing recipes, starting to do, deep dives into the science behind everything that I was talking about. I really had a rich experience in medicine before I even considered myself, worthy of putting out information.
And what's that about, Rupy? Where do you think that is it because of the way the infrastructure of the medical profession is set up that you didn't feel that, or was it some form of imposter syndrome? What was the fear around putting information out too soon?
I think it's definitely a blend of both of them. Imposter syndrome, I think everyone will have, regardless of whether you're a consultant who's been in the game for 20, 30 plus years, or whether you're still in med school. And I think it's something that afflicts me as well. Even today, with all the knowledge base, all the formal degrees in nutrition and medicine and the experience and that kind of stuff. That's always going to be the case. But then also within medicine, there is certainly an infrastructure or hierarchical system whereby you never really want to be zagging when everyone's zigging. You never really want to put your head above the parapet. And there is good reason for that, because evidence-based medicine and the uniformity of how we practice is an important feature of medicine, such that everyone gets the same standard of care. But within those guidelines, there's definitely room for improvement, and there's room for personalization, and there's room for flex in certain areas. I'm definitely going to be a lot more open to the idea of somebody taking control of their health through nutrition and lifestyle means than someone who perhaps A, isn't knowledgeable, but B, hasn't had their own personal experience of what I have as well. So I think there's definitely a blend of both of those things as to why it took me a little while. But I think it is important. I do want to underline that. I think it is really important, particularly when you're coming at this from a medical professional's perspective, to have that lived experience. I mean, I've seen thousands of patients every single year when I'm practicing. I see thousands of patients. It's, something that I always have takeaways from every interaction I have with anyone, regardless of whether this is, the 50th time I've seen this particular condition in the month. I'm always learning some extra nugget of how I can better serve people through my other platforms or on a one-to-one basis. So I think there is that element as well that I have to concede to. But yeah, that's sort of how I started.
Yeah, this is awesome. There's a really powerful piece within this conversation about building a business as a wellness expert that I'd love to touch on with you. And I'd love to know your experience, Rupy, of building a career and building your professional body of work and your list of credentials and getting qualified alongside building a personal brand and building a business as an entrepreneur and a business owner. And initially, whether they felt like two separate endeavors or whether you have sort of felt those two journeys colliding as you've built the brand and business that you have today.
Yeah, I think when I started, there wasn't even the parallel entrepreneur business element to me that I was even thinking about. It was probably there, but I couldn't see it. It was kind of like transparent. I had an invisibility cloak on, whatever, next to me. And as I've sort of progressed through creating a brand that was completely by accident. I'm a lot more intentional about the things that I do when it comes to my personal brand, the brand, The Doctor's Kitchen, and the aspirations of where I want to take it. When I started, I just so happened to call my social media accounts The Doctor's Kitchen, maybe as part of that sort of imposter syndrome thing that I have like a bit of a shield to my name.
You're sort of behind it.
Yeah, and it's not like Dr. Rupy Aujla, on my Instagram account name. It's like Doctor's Kitchen. It's like, oh, it could be anyone. But as I progressed, I'm really glad I did that, because the aspiration, probably we'll get to this a little bit later, but the aspiration is for Doctor's Kitchen to be representative of multiple people in different geographical locations where there's a different me that's more appropriate to be serving those communities. So someone in, Brisbane, Australia, or Chennai, India, or parts of North America would warrant to have a different doctor representing those people under the umbrella of Doctor's Kitchen. Still talking about the same things that I talk about in terms of lifestyle medicine and nutritional medicine, but perhaps tailoring the types of vernacular that we use, or even the types of recipes that we create to better serve them. But when I started, I wasn't thinking about this at all. I was just like, look, I'm just putting out content out there so I can save time in my general practice or even in A&E, whereby I'm not writing down recipes. I can just say, go check out the YouTube, go check out the Instagram account. I put a whole ton of recipes and inspiration for how you can switch up your breakfast. Go check it out. And then, I don't need to like run late in clinic, as I was do, and I always still do whenever I'm working. So that was the start. It was never really being intentional about, okay, I'm going to do a book, and then I'm going to do a course, and then I'm going to do, an app, or start a nonprofit, that kind of stuff.
So at some point, I suppose you realized that or I suppose you came up against some kind of fork in the road. So I'm imagining, and again, I'd love to hear your experience on this. I'm imagining that there is some point at which you realize that the path to becoming, a surgeon or a consultant, or continuing to pursue your medical career is going to need some level of tunnel vision and focus versus building the Doctor's Kitchen brand and being a founder and a business owner. Tell me about that kind of fork in the road and how you rationalized the decision, and then we can go on a little bit deeper into the business model that you've built.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So there were probably multiple forks along the road to my journey. So the initial forks were probably a couple of years after I had my medical issues. And I decided, you know what, the threshold of my body is not suitable for a surgeon's lifestyle. So there was one fork in the road. I went down general practice, and with, specialist interest in accident and emergency medicine, that I could practice on my timeline rather than, the shift working sort of timeline. So I went down general practice. That also allowed me to explore lifestyle medicine in a little bit more detail that I was already getting interested in. Then I had another fork in the road where I was like, I'm pretty disillusioned with how the NHS is right now. This is back in 2014. I'm going to go away for a little bit. And I started practicing in a different healthcare system in Australia. And I was there for 2 years. And I did a mixture of A&E, ITU, and general practice. And that was when I had the idea of putting out content and, starting recipes and all that kind of stuff. When I came back, I was really living a double life. I was full-time medic, full-time, NHS work. And then at weekends and evenings, I was recipe creating. I was, engaging with audience members. I was replying to DMs. I was putting out as much stuff as I could. Really, not really practicing what I was preaching, if I'm honest. I was really burning the candle at both ends. And I'll be honest, the decision to go sort of, I'm on my sabbatical at the moment. I've only been on my sabbatical for about 11 months or so. I've still been doing medicine at least in a part-time basis up until 2022. So for me, I've kind of been coasting along, trying to do as much as I can in both worlds, where actually if I had my time again, I'd probably be a lot more intentional about doing a lot more focus on Doctor's Kitchen, because I've settled with myself now that in order to achieve the aspirations I've set myself, I need to do the thing that's going to scale the most. And that's the Doctor's Kitchen side of the business. I want to help as many people as possible. I could satisfy myself. A lot of people can feel satisfied by being a general practitioner, or being a surgeon, or you're going to hospital every single day. That's great. But now my aspirations have changed just because of the experience I've had over the last couple of years and the impact I know that I'm able to have. And if not me, then who? And I think being in this position right now, I can really afford the time and the effort to go big, as it were.
And that really sounds like a piece of work that is more internal than it is external. Can you talk me through that process and what maybe the two voices were that were kind of competing there for you in rationalizing that decision?
Yeah, that's such a perceptive question, Lauren. You're such a good interviewer, I swear. I've always been a fan of your interviewing techniques, and you just really listen, you dive deep. It's been a lot of internal work. I think it kind of came to a head during COVID when I went back full time and I was really trying to maintain the podcast and everything else. I had to obviously cut a number of staff members in terms of their time, and because I just wasn't around to manage them and to lead them, just because of my responsibilities. And I think in the wake of that and reflecting on that period of time, I really had to make that decision as to what truly makes me happy. And what makes me happy is the knowledge that I can help people without literally being in the same room, without literally having to do an intervention, prescribe a medication for them, and actually empowering people to take care of themselves is a unique ability that I've afforded myself from the work I've done over the last few years that not a lot of other medics can do, just because of the way the chips have fallen for me. So for me, I'm a lot more satisfied with my decisions. Had you asked me the same question a couple of years ago, I'd probably still be a little bit indecisive about it. But you're right; it's been a conscious decision. It's certainly something that I've had to tell myself to be a bit more selfish about. I know selfishness has a bit of a bad rap, but I think we do need to be a bit more selfish. I mean, particularly right now in the wake of junior doctor strikes and stuff, I think people are coming around to this idea that you have to look after yourself. And I was taught that lesson really early on. 14 years ago when I had my own health issues, I had to realize that I had to put myself first. And now, in the wake of what I'm doing and the choices I'm making, I'm being selfish, but I'm also doing a massive good to as many people as possible, because I know the impact that I'm going to have is going to be a lot bigger than had I been a regular general practitioner working 5 days a week.
Yes. And in an earlier episode to this, I had a really powerful conversation with Hazel Wallace, who I know that you know and are good friends with, about the more commercial and financial side of this decision and being perceived as somebody who has followed a path for a more or a higher financial return on the face of it. Has that played a part in your rationalization? Like, what does it mean for me to become a medical practitioner or a medic who is now an entrepreneur? And we're going to get into a conversation now about, Rupy's raising money and building his app empire. And like, what about that part of the rationalization?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think, if I wanted to live a very comfortable lifestyle, and I was optimizing for revenue and cash in my bank account, there's two ways of looking at it. I could either just focus on my podcast, do a few sponsored posts every now and then, build up my newsletter and do all that kind of jazz. And, creators online are making hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds doing that same playbook. And it's very easy and it's a very good lifestyle, if I'm honest. You could do the same thing in medicine, particularly medics who have exposure in media outlets, whether it be regular TV, whether it be because they have a big YouTube channel. They can start a very lucrative private practice and probably earn the same amount in terms of like hundreds of thousands of pounds per year. And I'm speaking very sort of pragmatically here about like just revenue, and rather than, the reason as to why a lot of medics have started going down this path in the first place. For me, it's all about impact. And so instead of like sitting back and writing a couple of books every year, doing my podcast and doing a few sponsored posts here and there, I basically reinvested the whole thing into building my app and building sort of a big giant baseball bat, which I'm taking a massive swings with and just trying to knock things out of the park and have massive scale. And that's that's what truly makes me happy, because ultimately, for me, it's about helping as many people as possible. And if I can satisfy to myself that I'm having a bigger impact, then the money really doesn't come into it. So I've never really come up with any criticism online or in person about me taking an easier path than being, day-to-day doctor. Because the fact is, and a lot of people really realize this, I know I've just described it as like, doing a podcast every now and then. It's a lot of hard work, as you know. It's a really hard work. It's so much indecision. There's no playbook. Within medicine, it's very structured. It's like you do these exams, you kiss up to these people, you make sure you're nice to everyone, you get to this level, you start a private practice. Like there's loads of people who have done that. Whereas when you're doing this kind of work and this kind of world, there's no playbook. No one's really like giving you advice about what the next steps are. I'm lucky to have had mentors in different industries and other entrepreneurs, but you're just kind of making stuff up as you go along. So yeah, for me, I've never really come up against anyone saying, oh, well, you know, you're leaving medicine for the money, because I'm very open about like where I'm investing all my capital and my time, and actually, you know, what I want to achieve long term. So yeah, that's I'm lucky that I haven't had any pushback in that respect.
Yeah, which is great, and you know, important for our audience to hear, because most of the time it's a perception anyway, isn't it? It's not that people are actually saying it. It might even just be the fear that people might be thinking that gets in the way. And you know what? I'm of the belief that you're allowed to have a tremendous impact in the world and do really good work, and also make money and have a financial return.
100%.
So, you know, that's the view that I come at it from, and that I would love to empower our audience to adopt as well. But let's talk. You mentioned there about mentoring and the benefit that you've had of learning from other entrepreneurs. So at some point you realize, actually, you know, I'm building a business here. I'm going to launch an app, and that's going to be the business model. And so you've got to start that investigative process, finding the playbook, as it were. What does that look like for you? So tell us a little bit about the journey so far, when the app launched, how it's evolved, how that business model looks on the inside.
Yeah, for sure. So just to preface everything, so when I came back to the UK and I got approached to do a book, and then the next sort of logical step was like, oh, to promote the book, you should start a podcast. And when you're doing the podcast, oh, people can hear you speak. Oh, you should start doing speaking gigs, and we can do corporate stuff. So every element of like the business, and it took me a couple of years to even register it as a business, I'll be honest. You know, I've sort of been dragged through. You know, I haven't really been like, oh, okay, I'm going to do this, and then this is the next step, and whatever. I've just kind of been dragged through it. And the first time I thought intentionally about what I want to create was when I started the nonprofit Coloring Medicine, with a bunch of other medics and dietitians, to educate the new generation of medical students and nurses to be confident to talk about nutrition in clinical environments. So that was the intention number one, do that as a for good campaign. But then the other thing was like, okay, how I'm going to have massive impact in people's lives. And I realized it's great to put information out there. It's great to write books and inspire people with recipes. But in order to have impact, whilst I have reach, in order to have impact, I need to be in people's pockets. I need to be literally there guiding them on a daily basis to make the right decisions and sort of be like their mini health coach. Now, I can't do that for millions of people across the UK and across the world. What's a really good way of doing that? Well, technology. Technology has enabled scale, and what I'm really saying in a word is leverage. How can I leverage the knowledge that I have and give that to as many people as possible? And so I started looking around at some incredible companies that everyone's heard of, obviously, the Headspaces and Calms of the world, CenterFit, that hadn't started back then when I was thinking about it. There's a couple of other examples of companies that have had massive impact. And I thought, well, what if there's a way of educating people, of providing structure for how they can design recipes that are tailored to them, personalize it, all that kind of stuff. And so the first step in actually determining what I should build in this technology market was actually speaking to people. So we did a massive survey of people, not trying to like throw our solution at them, but really define what the problem was that people were having. So we asked them things like, what's the hardest thing about eating healthy? What are the barriers to eating healthy? What are the constraints that you have? Like how did you navigate a difficult scenario when, you know, you didn't have options to eat well? Maybe it was at work, maybe it was at whatever. So we defined what the problem was. And I've always said this, and I say this to everyone: you've got to fall in love with the problem, not the solution that you're trying to sell to people. And so at that point, I was agnostic about what kind of solution it was, whether it was an app, whether it was a course, whether it was a web-based platform, whether it was just doing the social media stuff. Like maybe that was the best way. And after doing that big survey, we invited some people to do some qualitative interviews. And that's when we really got into, okay, an app seems the best way of being able to tackle this problem that, we would fall in love with. Then COVID hit. We had like a bit of a setback, and then I had to sort of push that right to the back of the queue. And then we started like really wireframing like what an app could look like, what was available currently on the market, the kind of differentiating factors and the USPs that Doctor's Kitchen could provide, which is the nutrition research. So we did like a whole piece that we haven't really shouted about too much actually, but we should do, because a lot of the work, a lot of the investment has actually been in the research arm and actually defining what makes a brain healthy recipe, what makes a skin healthy recipe, what empirical evidence are we using to define those different health goals, and then offering it to users in a seamless, beautifully designed, very frictionless user experience. Now, what we have currently today is a library of recipes that people can filter according to their dietary needs and health goals. But really what we get to in the future is creating the easiest process of eating, shopping, and using food as medicine, such that you click a button, it already understands what your needs are, it sorts out your meals for the week, and it also gets your shopping delivered to you for the normal price of a normal supermarket.
Amazing.
So that's literally like where we're going to get to, because what we've defined is actually personalization is great. CGMs and microbiota tests, metabolomics, wonderful, wonderful P4 medicine technology that's going out there. But where I see the elephant in the room is actually I can have as much information as possible. I can ram as much information at people through all these different means as possible. But when it comes to how you're going to navigate when you're in a pret-a-manger, or how you're going to navigate when you've got a 4-year-old that doesn't like peas and asparagus and all this other stuff, how are you going to navigate those sort of like real world problems? That's where I think we can have a real big impact. So that in a nutshell, so I know it's a bit noodly of my sort of description of how we got to where we are at the moment, but that's sort of like why I even decided to allocate so much time and capital towards building the app in the first place.
Yeah, and what I really admire, Rupy, is how true to that statement you've been of really falling in love with the problem, because with that, with the reverse of that, where you're too caught up in what you're building and what you're creating and your offer, you can often lose sight of the real experience that your customers are having and forget to build something that actually meets all of their needs and not just one or two. So like you say, there are people crying out for more education and more information and more credibility when it comes to the world of health and well-being. But if you're too busy to implement, then it's effectively falling on deaf ears. So it's that implementation part that you have to really understand. And I think too, and I say this to my clients all the time, the more you can understand the pain and the frustration, the more empathy you build with your audience. And it's that emotional connection that motivates someone to A, buy from you, and B, take action once they've bought that thing. Because there's no point in, buying it and then it sits on a shelf somewhere looking pretty, or, suddenly you notice that recurring payment's coming up on your bank statement and you've forgotten to use it.
Yeah, 100%. And that's actually one thing that I'm really passionate about. It's not just about making the sale, and, like a subscription product suffers from people just forgetting that they even have the product. So when people aren't using our product, we literally want to like message them like, look, we noticed you haven't used the product. Do you want to cancel? Or is there some way in which we can add more value? Or like, that's like the relationship that we want to have with our customers. We only really want you to be engaging with us if you're invested in yourself and we're actually providing value to you. And one of the biggest things that I always tell entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs in the health and wellness space is to do as much research as possible. We spent literally COVID prolonged things, but we literally spent 3 years before we even built anything, before we wrote a line of code, chatting to people, diving into the messages and the interactions that I've had with my audience publicly, doing surveys, like really falling in love with like how we can better serve people and what the problems are that people are having. Before like we built like our desired solution, because if I'm not to sound cynical here, but like if I wanted to optimize for revenue, there's lots of different things that I could do. I could start a green powder, I could start a probiotic blend, I could do a lunchbox package or like whatever it might be, and I might still do those things. I think it's they serve people in different ways. But for me, I really wanted to, it really comes down to that impact, right? I just want to make sure that I'm having a tangible impact. So much so that as part of my master's in nutritional medicine, the dissertation that I'm designing is going to be on how the app can tangibly impact people's consumption of fruit, vegetables, nuts, and seeds, and actually improve their healthy index score, such that they have an anti-inflammatory diet or they have a high fiber diet. A very, very simple endpoint, but something that I want to be able to use for myself to validate, I've put all this energy and effort into, am I having impact? Yes, I am, or no, I'm not. And then we need to revisit it. And sorry, to go back to a question that you asked me earlier that I forgot to answer, in terms of advice and mentors and people in other industries that have helped me along the way. So I'm really lucky to have been on the NHS innovations pathway. So there's a clinical entrepreneurship scheme that's run by NHS England. It's headed up by Professor Tony Young, who's an entrepreneur himself, but he's a urologist, professor of urology. He calls himself a plumber from Essex, but he's a very humble guy, and he's gone on his own entrepreneurship journey. And that network of other entrepreneurs that have worked within and outside the NHS was so valuable to me, because I realized there was a network of people who had similar aspirations in different ways. I mean, these guys are creating medical devices, drone delivery systems for blood transfusions, for example, logistic apps that improve the efficiency of hospital buildings, as well as people, who are designing pharmaceuticals and better drug technologies and diagnostics and all that kind of stuff. And the fact that I've had such a warm reception from those types of entrepreneurs who recognize the value of prevention, who recognize the value of improving diet and lifestyle, given that it costs, the NHS in excess of 20% of the total yearly budget, was really quite validating for me as well. And one of the key themes of that entrepreneurship scheme, and I encourage anyone who works within the NHS or wanted to work within a healthcare system to check it out as well, is the mentorship partnership program. So my mentor is Liz Assel-Payne, who heads up Orca. And what Orca do is they validate medical apps, and they give a scoring system based on clinical efficacy, security, all this kind of stuff. And having those once every 3 or 4 month conversations with Liz was really impactful for me. Like, just giving me a lot of guidance about raising all the pitfalls, like the way I should be thinking about how I develop a product. And then I'm lucky to have other entrepreneurs in my sort of real close network of friends who have done, performance marketing businesses. And, one of my good friends, Jay Radi, is an entrepreneur. We've started a podcast together called Spiritual Entrepreneur. Well, we're changing it from Happy Millionaire to Spiritual Entrepreneur, because Spiritual Entrepreneur is a bit more about like what we talk about on the podcast anyway. But he started like 3 or 4 businesses. He's like a real strong mentor of mine. I just call him up and say, look, I'm trying to hire someone at this level. What kind of questions would you ask them? Because I have no idea how to vet. If someone told me they're a really good software engineer, I'd be like, great, that's awesome. I have no way of validating that. I'm just learning this stuff from zero. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was don't ask how, ask who. Who can I ask about this problem? Who can I go to who has done this before? Who do I know who's walked this path? And even if that means, listening to a podcast, or, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to know that individual or that business owner, because we're so privileged in this day and age to be able to access the minds of the greatest entrepreneurs of all time within the tap of an iPhone. There's so many
totally
questions
agree
that I
with
have off
that.
the bat.
Yeah, so just on that note, so I realize I'm just going off one here, but some of the most impactful educational materials that I've been privy to, putting mentoring aside, I think mentoring is great, particularly if you have a network. I've reached out to people on LinkedIn, and they have no connection with me whatsoever. Yes, I come with a bit of an audience, so there's validation there. So I might be, a little bit out of the norm here, but I've been blown away by the supportive nature of other entrepreneurs on LinkedIn. I've literally cold messaged people who have since become mentors, where they check in with me like every 2 or 3 months and like, how things are going, can I help with anything? And we have literally never met in person. And then there's books. There's like Inspired. There's a whole bunch of podcasts that I listen to on product thinking. All these different elements. Basically, me falling in love with the problem, me falling in love with how I can create a solution, whatever that might be, has led me down the path of like away from nutrition books, not fully away, obviously, but towards like this huge network of people and information that has been highly, highly educational. And I'm still on this journey. I'm like literally, just starting, but it's super exciting. There's so much stuff out there. So if anyone is like interested in this world, like there's just so many places to find great quality content.
Yeah, and I so admire that about you, Rupy, because this is that part of your identity that embraces entrepreneurship and all its multifaceted aspects of product development, marketing, selling, the psychology of habit creation, right? Because you can come to the world with passion and knowledge and expertise in your field of health and well-being, but not fully understand how to really reach people and to really connect and to instill habit changing, psychology, so that what you're teaching and sharing actually sticks. And I'm trying now to remember what we talked about off air versus on air, because I want to talk about the community piece. And I think we talked about that before we hit record. And that is, your experience of being a content creator and how helpful that has been when it has come time to actually put a product or solution out into the world, i.e. your app. I'd love your advice on that, because as someone listening to this podcast who may just be starting out or to be an aspiring expert in their field, wanting to make an impact, wanting to make a real difference in the world, what are the keys to successfully building and cultivating a highly engaged community and audience in your experience?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's hard for me to answer because I think I benefited from being relatively early. And I think creating an audience today has it has its own challenges that perhaps I didn't have as much when I started back in like 2016. So Instagram was getting hot. There weren't as many different channels. So the things that I always recommend to people is choose a channel that you absolutely love using, and focus on that one platform in the early stage. It's very easy to do what I'm trying to do right now, which is like be on Twitter, be on YouTube, being TikTok and all this kind of stuff, but just choose one channel. The other thing is I would say have like 3 key identifiable attributes that you talk about time and time again. People will learn to know what you're about just through those key points. Like for me, people know I'm the food as medicine guy, I'm the recipe guy, I'm a medical doctor. I talk about it from an evidence-based lens. That's we did some market research, and there's some key things that people always attribute to me and the kind of recipes that I put out there. And I would say the other thing, which is particularly relevant for the health and wellness industry is to really lean into being a well-read expert. And I think that requires time in market. Maybe it's because I'm a medic and I have sort of a responsibility to make sure that I'm confident enough in prescribing and being that point of call for patients, in that, like, I'm a fully qualified GP. I've seen thousands of patients. I've been responsible for signing really important documents and treatment pathways for people. But I see a trend where people try to become an expert, quote unquote, very early on. And I think you really need to be like somebody who is very well read in the area. I don't regard myself as an expert, put it that way. I've been a doctor for over a decade now. I'm very well read. I describe myself as well read. I don't call myself an expert at all. I call other people experts. I lean on them. I invite them on the podcast and we talk about it. But like, I still don't, regard myself as an expert. And I think there is a bit of a trend towards people who, like, fresh out of med school, let's say, and like trying to be that media person. I would say, like, really be that person who's had time in market. And
on that, Rupy, I couldn't agree more. And how that translates for me when strategically I'm coaching someone who wants to be seen as a wellness expert and build authority is in that part where, and you sort of, it's so easy to say it, isn't it? But having sat with literally thousands of patients, right? Like that can't be understated. That for me is where true mastery comes from, is in that one-on-one client or patient interaction, whether you're a yoga teacher or a medical doctor or a psychologist or a nutritionist. We can't underestimate that one-on-one client or patient facing interaction to create mastery.
Yeah.
It's such a strong foundation. And whether you do it within your business infrastructure, i.e. working with one-to-one clients in a paid clinic capacity, or whether you've done it in a public health service over the years of being, a medical practitioner as a career path, I always say that's the strongest foundation on which to build an expert business. Start with one-to-one. And then when it comes to building something like a volume-based offer, like an app or an online course, like, you're going to draw on all of that mastery, but you're also going to have the confidence of someone who is, you call it well-read. I think it's who has the track record of actually being that expert in field, in market, as you put it.
Yeah. It's like, to use a parallel, I trust certain creators online who produce recipes on the basis of, like, the number of times they've created recipes and the amount of recipes they've created, the sort of like the trust in that I have in that, how many times it's been tested, all those different elements that, like, go into me respecting someone as an expert or as a master of their craft. Like, that's what you also need to cultivate when being a health and wellness expert or someone who builds an audience based on that sense of credibility.
Yeah. And it's not something you can fast track either.
Yes.
I think that's the thing,
yes.
right? It's actually, it's only time that creates that mastery.
Yeah, 100%. You've articulated exactly what my intention there. You can't fast track these things. You can't fast track be an expert in this. But going back to your original question, choosing a platform, having key messages that people identify you with, so you're memorable from that perspective, and then time in market. I think it's really, really important.
Such good advice. Rupy, tell me a little bit about where things are going in the future for you. So we've kind of talked about, the groundwork that's been built to the foundations, how you've developed that identity of expert, professional, health professional, and entrepreneur. Where is this all going next in terms of that impact piece?
Yeah, I think like up to this point, I've done everything in a real janky kind of way. Like,
Janky, such a good
yeah,
word.
I know. It's just like real, like just mishmash of like I was saying before we started, I'm recording this in my living room. We don't have like a premises. We don't have like a dedicated studio. So I think everything that I'm doing over the next 12 months is really formalizing exactly what the Doctor's Kitchen is from an infrastructure point of view. So having an HQ, having a purpose-built kitchen, having our own videography and proper professional podcast setup, so we can invest the time and energy required to make those real foundations of the business. And the other element is formalizing exactly what the Doctor's Kitchen digital arm is, so our app. And so I'm bringing on a chief product officer who's very experienced and is super excited about the vision of creating an app that lives in everyone's pockets, that can actually deliver on this premise of helping them eat well every day, because that's really, the mission of the app. And I think, to describe what Doctor's Kitchen does long term is we spark joy and generate health. And that sort of like very simplified mission, if you like, or vision, it kind of articulates itself through everything. So the way I have conversations with guests on the podcast, they're jovial, they're lighthearted. There is a serious undertone because we're trying to generate health, but we're also quite pleasant and joyful about it. The same thing about the kind of recipes, the content that we put on YouTube, the way that the tone of voice in our newsletters, it's all very lighthearted, even though we are talking about quite serious subjects. And so this whole articulation of the brand being around sparking joy and generating health is something that I hope to really, formalize in everything that we do. But we do need to get the infrastructure right. So I'm looking at the moment of building the studio from scratch, hiring an internal tech team, and we're going to be looking for doing some big people stuff. So raising some investment, which we haven't done before. Everything's been bootstrapped. We've created the app just through basically doing everything else and using the revenue from all those different streams of the business. And I think that's quite attractive to investors as well. The fact that we've validated the users and the fact that we can generate revenue, and also the vision and the fact that our hearts are really in it as well. I think that's been really important when having those early investor conversations. So yeah, that's kind of like where we're at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And I I think that too is to be admired. The fact that your commitment to the vision is now so clear. But there's something that I want to emphasize, and that is that sometimes when we're listening to podcasts like this, and our listeners hear somebody like you talk about having that level of clarity and having that level of vision, that it's easy to think that you've got to have that before you start. And yet I think the key, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rupy, is actually to start in order to get that vision and clarity, that it's only actually come for you from doing, rather than it being something that needed to be finessed and articulated before you could get going.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Like when I started, I just was messing around in my kitchen and putting stuff on these amazing platforms on social media that allowed you to distribute your message to, millions of people across the world if you were lucky enough. And one of the biggest blockers I think that people have, and I mentor some people as well, people from all levels of their journey, and the biggest blocker I think for people is just not starting. And there's actually one person, I won't name her, but there is one person, and I see her at like 2-month intervals every now and then. She's like, oh, I just want to ask you about this and when you started and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, you haven't started yet? Like you can't talk to me until you start. You just have to start. And it's difficult. It's hard. It's, there's so much indecision, there's imposter syndrome, all these different things. But I promise you, like when you start, that is the hardest step to take. And when you start, things will fall into motion. You just need to give yourself that forward motion at the start.
Yeah, I think that word janky is great because, like, I tell clients, make the crap version first, but it's like
Yeah.
make the janky version. And if you're not making that, you've waited too long. Like
Mm.
if the first version of your website is not kind of embarrassing, or like if the first video you ever put into the world you're not stammering or stuttering, or like it's not slick, then you've waited too long.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's my take on it.
Absolutely. There's some videos of me really early on where I am. It's really cringeworthy, but I keep it up there because it's a good reminder of, like, how far you come and stuff. And you got to show everything. You got to be comfortable, warts and
Yeah.
all.
I always think it's really helpful for anyone thinking, oh, Rupy's got it nailed. He's got this wonderful high level of production. For any highly regarded content creator, if you go to YouTube and you use that filter to
Yeah.
flip it from like latest to like earliest video, you'll be reminded of the importance of getting started, right?
100%.
And that anyone you admire, any highly reputable online expert, started with the crap version, and it's quite reassuring, and it reminds you to just get it done.
Yeah, totally. And even like in the flip side of that, I think content production value has been flipped on its head with the amount of UGC that's actually more attractive, and there's more virality. I think people want to see the vulnerable side of things. They want to see the less polished version. So now has never been a better time to start, if I'm honest.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, love it. Okay, Rupy, quick fire round. So whatever first comes to you.
Yeah.
What would you say is one thing you wish you had known when you first started your business journey?
I would say getting my accountants, spending more time with my accountants, and spending more on the accountants just in general. Don't go for cheap accountants. Go for efficient, expensive accountants. Yeah.
That is a common piece of advice, is like getting the numbers nailed early.
Yeah.
What about one thing that maybe you wish you had done sooner in this business journey?
I would say my business plan. I would definitely say a clear, coherent business plan and pitch deck. Even if you don't show it to anyone, it's good for you to have that on your desktop. And a really good way, a very easy way of doing that is just go to Lean Canvas and just get a Lean Canvas up. Everyone should know what a Lean Canvas is. It's a one-page A4 document that gives you all the elements of what a business plan is. And that is the best way to get started, because it just clarifies in your mind exactly what you're doing and where you're going. And it will change, but it's always good to have that.
Yeah, and I think that whilst business plans can be a little intimidating, I love that idea of a one-pager. And it does mean that when you have, option anxiety or shiny object syndrome, that you can always come back and remember what your focus is and get back to work building that, rather than being, constantly distracted or swayed by, the next exciting opportunity that comes your way. A little bit more philosophical, Rupy. Why do you do what you do?
Oh, why do I do what I do? It really comes down to those 4 words: spark joy and generate health. That's really an articulation of why I do what I do. It's because I love making people happy and I love making people healthy. It's why I went into medicine. It's why I love medicine, and it's why I'm parking clinical medicine for now to do what I'm aspiring to do with the app.
Yeah, and what you're already doing, for sure. What's the best part about your job? What do you love day to day?
Autonomy. Autonomy is the best thing. When you own your time, you own your diary. You don't have to answer to, well, you do have to answer to people, but the majority of my day to day is on my schedule. I think that's the best thing. The flip side is I'm like a classic people pleaser and workaholic, and I'm lucky to have a wife that reminds me of that, and she makes sure I down tools at a suitable hour in the evening. So yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Sounds like a good partner.
Yeah.
What would you say is, and I'm sure you've had lots of good advice, but what is sort of one piece of advice that stands out to you as having been really useful in your journey?
That's a really good question. I would say it's something relatively recent, actually. It's know that you're in your own lane, it's your own race, and it's your own pace. So I say that to myself fairly often these days. Actually, it's own lane, own race, own pace. I instead of looking at all the other shiny objects and looking at what other people are doing, which is very, very easy to do, particularly if you're building a business on social media, you've got to remind yourself that it's your game that you're playing, and you can't measure your success by other people's seeming success. People might see me and just think, oh, this guy's got it all sort of together. He's got best-selling cookbooks. He's got an app. He's got all that kind of stuff. Dude, we're all playing this game that can be really, I mean, it can really press on your imposter syndrome strings. It can really get you down. So just remind yourself that it's your race. You're going at your own pace, and it's in your own lane.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. And yeah, podcasts are great and these interviews are great, but it is easy to listen to something like this and feel that you're not far enough along, especially when you're someone who is ambitious and driven and passionate and wants to make a big impact in the world. But it's also important to enjoy the journey too. And you can't enjoy it if you're constantly flogging yourself saying, I should be further along, or I should be where Rupy is, or I should be doing all the things he's doing, or whatever. So take the inspiration, see the possibility, and know that's great. That's such great advice that the best way for you to enjoy the journey is to do it your way at your pace, and know that, there's just so much to learn on the journey when you can just embrace it as a journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I heard this analogy actually. Someone was like, entrepreneurship and starting your own business is kind of like going on a roller coaster. And you wouldn't reasonably go on a roller coaster and like start complaining about when there's a dip, and then when it goes dark, and when you get splashed on by water and stuff. You're like, what on earth is going on here? And then you think about it and you're like, no, dude, you're on a roller coaster. These things are meant to happen. And the aim of the game is to try and maintain a sense of peace and contentment when you're on the roller coaster, and enjoy it as well at the same time. Enjoy the fact that there's dips and highs, and there's anticipation and all that kind of stuff. So that's something that I've tried to remind myself of.
Thank you so much, Rupy. Such a great conversation as always. So appreciate you, and very, very excited to see everything that is in store for you and for the Doctor's Kitchen.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, it's been great chatting again. And I appreciate you too.